This is Tyrese Haliburton, and you're listening to Setting the Pace.
All right, everybody, joining us now on Setting the Pace. He is a recurring guest, but not on here often enough. It is James Boyd from The Athletic. He's covering the Colts. He's talking Pacers. He's watching Purdue right now. He's doing everything. He is just a sports guy. So, James, thanks so much for coming on. How you doing?
Thanks for having me. Always good to check in with you guys. It's been a while, but obviously with the second half, or really the final third of the NFL, I'm not NFL, I'm sorry. You see, I'm still in NFL mode, but NBA season coming up. I'm excited to see what the Pacers do because they're healthy. They play better basketball, obviously, than early in the season, but we will need to see some more continuity and consistency on the defensive end, which I'm sure we'll get into to,
Yes.
appease some guys like you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I asked you before you came on, like, is there anything you want to talk about? And you said, I don't know. The starting lineup change is pretty interesting to me. So I'm just gonna give you the floor. I mean, we've talked about it on this pod. I've had different people on to talk about it. So I'm just kind of curious your thoughts, especially as someone that's covered this team before for the Star.
Yeah, you know what's interesting about it is I think Benedict Mathurin is such a good scorer that it just doesn't matter where he fits in, if that makes sense, because he's elevated his game. Obviously, he can always get to the free throw line, which helps his efficiency and helps, just basically keep your offense humming. And so to see him kind of explode the way he has, I think that really shows one, like I said, he's a pretty fantastic scorer, but two, the maturity is there too, because it wasn't like he was undeserving of having a starting spot. And I totally understand what Rick Carlisle was saying. I know it got weird against the Knicks when Aaron Neesmith like got inserted, they got in foul trouble, and it's like, what are we doing? And the fans are like, you see, you should never change anything. But I understand the method behind it. And now I'm just like, all right, whatever you do, make sure that what you do with some conviction and you kind of stick with it is my opinion on the matter, just because you don't want to be like changing up starting lineups, changing up roles when you're again trying to get to that home stretch of the season where everyone's role is clearly defined and you know who you are going into the playoffs, which should be pretty fun because I mean, I know you have many pods where you went through some early season crises, but now we're seeing the Pacers look like the team that we expected them to be coming off of that Eastern Conference Finals run.
Oh, that they are. Yeah, it's been great. But I think for Mathurin, you look at this as like everybody knows just how talented he is, and they know just how high of a draft pick that he is. So everybody thinks sixth overall pick, year three, why isn't he starting? However, here's one thing you talked about maturity. 3 years into the league, we have not seen or heard Mathurin complain about his role. He doesn't send out all these cryptic messages or go to the media when he has an issue. So do you think maybe it's the fan base that is overblowing this a bit of him coming off the bench? Because we just saw him have a killer game versus Washington where we don't win that game unless he gets as hot as he does.
Absolutely. Again, defense, please play some. I was watching that game like, why are you all going to give everyone a heart attack before the break? But getting back to Ben, I think when you look at it from a very just clear perspective, his salary doesn't change. So he's getting paid any less coming off the bench. Like he's a fine player, got drafted high, he's making good money. But aside from that, I think he's love of the game. We know his backstory, we know his mentality. I don't think, at least the Ben that I know and have covered, and again, it hasn't been like as hands-on as it was during that first year when he got drafted. But I would say that he has like come too far to kind of just like give up or kind of fold in or pout. I mean, if you look at his career, every step of the way, he's always kind of prevailed by just being a dog. And so that can be starting or off the bench. And so I think that kind of helps smooth things over. And when you see him respond like that, I think you can ask more of the other guys too, because you can point to this guy and say, hey, he's might not getting what he wants, individually. I'm sure he wants to be a starter and he believes he's a starting caliber player. But Rick Carlisle can look at the other guys and say, hey, he's sacrificing for us. Why can't you do the same thing? And so I think that that's a good sign for this team going forward. And obviously, you need him to be confident and to feel like he's valuable, whether it's off the bench or not. And the bottom line is, when it comes to winning time, especially when they get to the playoffs, as we talked about, they missed his ability to go one-on-one, to kind of make something out of nothing, to bail them out a few times, because you need that in the playoffs. And so as long as he's confident, he's rolling, and he's feeling like he's valued, you're good. And I think that he's handled it, like I said, with great maturity.
All right, I want to throw my opinion out there on this.
Fans relax a little bit. Calm
Yes.
down.
I want to throw my opinion out there and get your thoughts on it because I've been, mulling over this the last couple of days, kind of thinking like, what is the message that Carlisle has been preaching? Well, we have too many scorers in the starting five. We want to put Ben on the bench to kind of even out the scoring. I don't really buy that. I personally think that his defense has been too inconsistent, and that's been a problem since he's been in the league, right? And they just trust Aaron's defense a little bit more. So I think that they're hoping to get more defense in the first unit, and instead of worrying about the offense being more in the second unit, because if they really wanted to, they could just stagger the minutes where Ben comes out early and then goes back with the second unit. So I think more so it's about let's get started off better defensively. And we know Tyrese isn't a good defender. Like he's getting better. He's playing harder this year, but like as an on-ball guy, like you want him to kind of guard the weakest guy. And so I've noticed with Mathurin, like on-ball defense is much better usually than off-ball defense. I don't know what it is about his off-ball defense, but he just kind of doesn't pay as much attention to it. So to me, I just feel like the messaging is positive because they want to make it seem like it's hey, we're putting him on the bench because we want him to score more. But I think it's more so about we want him to, we want a better defensive start. Even though I think that if Mathurin were just playing at a similar, like a not even as good as Neesmith, but it's just like better as a defender, they wouldn't have made this change.
See, Alex has been around the media too much, man. Like he's learning the tricks of the trade and knowing how to parse through all the coach speak. I think there's some truth to that for sure. And I think when you look at, I talked about maturity with Ben, I think one of the ways he can still grow is that off-ball defense, mainly because it's a sign of being young to me. When you see guys who kind of become disinterested when the ball is like not right in front of them. And obviously we know the key to playing sound defense in the NBA is not necessarily the first guy in front of you. It's the other two or three that can rotate or be aware of the actions that are going on, because the NBA is so good where guys are going to get beat. I mean, love watching Tyrese Haliburton play. Guys are going to get around him. You love watching even Aaron Neesmith play defense. Guys are going to get around him. You need that help. And so I think that the point of attack defense is probably better with Aaron Neesmith because we've seen it and what he can do to deter some of the better, wing players in this league, and also knocking down shots. And if he can give them that boost, I know he's had a weird year with the injuries in and out of the lineup and not really finding his rhythm. But again, if he can find that, like that second wind down the stretch, I think that'd be beneficial for this crew. But you hit it right on the head, Alex. I think sometimes fans can get frustrated. That's the part you don't hear when they're like, why isn't he starting? It's like, man, you can't get backdoor cut, this many times, or you can't lose sight of the ball this many times. And this is someone I think that can definitely be a better defender and has shown signs of wanting to be that. But it has to be like a second nature type of thing. Whereas I think sometimes he reverts back to bad habits per se. And it happens. I don't think it's intentional. Like he's just out there just willy-nilly. But there are certain moments, and I think that's what they're demanding of him, to be more locked in because, in the playoffs, and I keep bringing the playoffs up because I look at the Pacers now, man, they're no longer like the Cinderella fun little team, in my opinion. Like you proved you were a contender last year. You're in the Final Four, so to speak, of the NBA. And if you want to legitimize that, you got to hang your hat on doing the little things right. And those little lapses in judgment are huge momentum swings in playoff games because we know that one or two possessions can decide everything. And so I'm excited to see his maturation on that end continue to grow. But yeah, I totally agree with your point on it and why Rick phrases it like that, because he wants to protect the team. And you're very rarely going to have a coach just come out here and be, Bob Knight and be fiery and blunt and just tell it like it is. And especially at the pro level where you do have to deal with, egos and grown men who make a lot more money than you, quite frankly.
Yeah, I also think, when we talked about it, Mathurin's come a long way defensively. Last year, if he made a mistake at times, he could get pulled. And then people would be like, why did he only play 13 minutes? I remember there was a specific game last year, he only played 13 minutes. Like, you don't want that to ever happen for your fifth overall pick. But come a long way. I think he's gained Carlisle's trust, but he's always asked to be coached hard. And I think that he is coached hard. He doesn't complain about that. But talking about the fan base's frustration, there's like this early perception of this team because how they started out 10-15. There's like that stank on them right now of like, oh, are the Pacers as good as they were last year? But look at this. I broke out the schedule from last year. 365 days ago. Last year, the Pacers were 31-25 at this time. They're currently 30-23. They have a better record right now than what they had last year.
That's crazy.
Yet Everyone makes it seem like we're this mediocre team. Do you think the expectations for this fan base just became way too high after that playoff run, and it's a little bit unfair?
I think it was always going to be a bit unfair just because it's so hard to sustain success in any professional sport. And you don't want to take it for granted, if that makes sense. Like that was a fun year to cover, and I'm sure a fun year for the city because there was so much, shutting up that the Pacers did of other people. But with that in mind, man, I think that you hit it right on the head when it comes to perhaps not weathering the storm, even from a team perspective, but from a fan perspective, as best as you should, and maybe not trusting what you saw, a few months prior. You know what I mean? And I get it. The start of the season was ugly. It was frustrating. They were losing to bad teams, losing in weird ways. And honestly, I had questions. I was like, whoa, I don't know what happened over the summer, but this is not going to work. This is not tenable. Like, if this keeps it up, I mean, knock on wood, Myles is still here, but I'm like, do we see some big moves? That's a joke, tongue in cheek. But seriously, I'm like, at that point, you have to start thinking about different moves and different options. And I think they corrected themselves enough before the trade deadline to say, hey, we want to ride this thing out, which is why I wasn't really putting too much to the trade rumors and things like that, but just the overall point that you're trying to make. I think that fans want to be right so bad sometimes. and you did so much, like, trash talking last year, feeling validated about how they played, that you don't want to, like, not necessarily you don't want to stick with the team, but you don't want to accept that version of them, and no one should. But I do think that you can sometimes overcompensate a bit and kind of forget, even as a reporter, that it's a long season. Yeah, because I've had you. I'm sure you have Tony on here plenty of times, but I've had conversations with Tony, and I'm like, I'll text him like, man, what the heck is going on with Haliburton? Bro, what the heck is Myles doing? Yo, are they gonna play any defense ever? And then you look up, like you said, and the record's this, and they're fine. And I think once they kind of caught their rhythm, then you kind of saw them elevate and really come together. And so obviously it's better, to happen at any point than to never happen. You like it to happen sooner, but they're in a good spot. They're fine. And I think as long as you avoid that play in and really push, for a top four, type of spot, you're fine. You're fine. It's just, again, the fans, and they love basketball here, I can't blame them for not accepting a product that was probably less than what the Pacers themselves could, like, respectfully put out there. Like, that was weird basketball, man. Alex's eyes are getting big.
It was bad. It was bad there for a little bit. But I will say this because, I like that you're covering the Colts now because it's kind of a cool comparison or just a conversation to have. Like, here's a rookie, Anthony Richardson. They're trying to kind of give him the keys to the franchise a little bit, want him to be the guy. Tyrese, the moment he's traded here, he is the guy. And obviously, both franchises have kind of gone totally different directions, where the Pacers have had this great success where the Colts are kind of trying to find themselves still. So a lot of pressure has been put on Tyrese to be the face of the franchise. And like you said, last year, Final Four, this year, Facci, you mentioned it, they're a better team than they were last year, but there's been so many people that are just so upset with the way Haliburton's played. And James, you mentioned it. You text Tony. You're like, what's going on with Tyrese? I mean, when a guy has that much pressure on him and he's, been an all-star, had all the accolades that he's had, but he's not putting a consistent season together, how do you really evaluate how he's playing?
That's a great question, because we were talking to Rick last week right before the break, and I mentioned, giving congrats to Pascal being an all-star. And he's like, wait a second, we got 2 all-stars. And I'm thinking to myself, not this year. Like, I don't want to hear any of that coach speak of, I think he said it was like a numbers thing. No, it is not. He was not deserving of being an all-star because you can't play that bad for 20 games and expect to get in. That's just the bottom line. I think Tyrese would even say that himself. However, my biggest critique when it comes to him, and I understand it's a lot on his plate. I mean, he was compared to Peyton Manning by Kevin Pritchard before he ever played a game. Before the Pacers. Do you remember that, Alex? Like, we were sitting in the room, and I remember before his Pacers debut, Kevin Pritchard compared him to Peyton Manning and Andrew Luck. And I'll be honest, Ty, I love you, but I was like, there is no way in hell this guy's going to be on that caliber. And then he came out here and balled and was like, James, shut the F up. So I was like, okay, that's fine. I'll take that. And he ended up being one of the best point guards in the NBA. But all that to say, I think when it comes to him, he just can't disappear in certain games. And I feel like when game plans are meant to take him out of it and like pick him up 94 feet, make sure they like hedge hard on the screens and ice the screen super hard and trap him, all those things, he can be so unselfish to the point where he can take himself out of the game. And that to me is a valid criticism that I hear from the fan base all the time when I'm watching games, and even my own criticism. I'm like, you just cannot kind of give in. And it's not even that he's playing the wrong basketball. It's just, I don't know how to describe it. It's like you need to make it a version of your own basketball. You want to be able to take some shots. You want to be able to affect the game. So don't let them just take you out of it and by making the right play every single time. Force the issue sometimes. And so that's the only thing that I have with Tyrese. And I think that he's still trying to figure out that balance. And quite frankly, the peak Haliburton we saw was the guy who wouldn't allow somebody else to just turn him into a role player or stand in the guy player. Because when I look at some of these games where it's like 3 shot attempts, 6 shot attempts, I'm like, that's like the Kobe thing. It's like, I'd rather you go 0 for 12 or whatever than to be 0 for 3. Or I'm like, what are we doing? Like, are you hurt or what's going on? And when you're saying you're not hurt and you're playing, then obviously we got to hold you to the standard of you being an all-star caliber player, an all-NBA player, quite frankly. So it's been cool to see him kind of find his way through it, but I still would challenge him more to make sure he doesn't disappear. I'm not saying he's afraid of big moments. We saw him play great in Game 7 last year against the Knicks in the Garden, and the team overall. Any Knicks fans listening, you know what happened. I don't know why you'd be listening, but you know what happened with the record-setting shooting and all those things. So he's built for big moments. It's just fighting that unselfish nature to make sure that you stay engaged enough to be there for your team and to be the leader for your team, because we don't have to ask where SGA is. We don't have to ask where Anthony Edwards is. And I think you're on that caliber of player. And so that's the frustrating thing sometimes. It's like, wait a second, you can't have a stat line that looks like I was out there when you're Tyrese Haliburton. So I'm excited for him. And I think he's embraced all of it. And one thing I always give him credit for is he will own it. Sometimes it's frustrating because you're like, if you're owning it so much, man, we would like to stop having these conversations, I'm sure, among the fan base. But he does own it, doesn't run from it. And I think that he has the right type of mentality to get them where they want to go. And he just needs to be more, a little bit more selfish, I think, from time to time.
Yeah, I completely agree, because there's plenty of point guards that Tyrese is definitely better than, but to your point, they won't stop shooting. And there's certain guys, you look at like a De'Aaron Fox who might average like 25 points per game. You could debate who might be better, but the thing is, De'Aaron Fox is never going to go scoreless. He's going to.
That's what I'm saying. Yes.
So it's like he'll have, he could have an inefficient 20 points, but he'll get 20 points up there. So with Tyrese, we got to limit those 0, 3, and below 10 points. You can't have it from your starting point guard, your franchise player. But the trade deadline just came and went. Indiana essentially didn't make any moves. They cleared a roster spot to get a backup center. They're still debating who that center will be long-term for the rest of the season. We'll see. But do you feel, because they've always been reluctant to pay the tax, that there might just be that glass ceiling on this roster really being able to break through? Because you do look at some of the other teams in the league, unless they're homegrown, like maybe the Thunder, where you draft a lot of these guys, or SGA you traded for on draft night, those teams are willing to pay up. With the Pacers, they have a good roster, but maybe not a great roster. Do you think their inability to pay the tax is kind of holding them back, or can they still get it done with what they have?
That is a great question, Facci. I think that they're always going to be a little reluctant to go into the tax because of their ownership and the nature of their history when it comes to these types of things. And that can hinder you. However, I do think they have enough to be in the mix, and then I'm like have a puncher's chance to get back to the conference finals, potentially to the finals. Like they have a shot to do that, but I think your margin for error kind of shrinks when you don't perhaps financially invest a bit more, try to elevate your roster that much more. And I understand it's hard. It's a delicate thing, man. Like all that stuff isn't easy to do. I know, you can look at around the league and say, oh, this player is great. This player is team them up and it's going to work all well, but it doesn't always work out like that. I mean,
Phoenix.
I was just going to say, like, if that was the case, then I'm like, then Phoenix wouldn't be, entertaining trading Kevin Durant, it seems like every other day. So I understand why they wouldn't or would go into the tax, but I'm not convinced that a Pacers team, like I don't have to see it to believe it, to be quite honest with you.
No.
I would have to see it to believe it. for them to say, hey, to quote Jim Irsay from my Colts beat, they're all chips in, and they're going to go for it and spend that money and to kind of have no regrets. I don't think that that's the case. And I think part of it is because they've become so solid without that in the last few years, like the last 2 years. Like looking back at it, man, every move that they've made, there hasn't been one where I'm like, this was bad. This didn't make sense. And that's really, I mean, a testament to Kevin Pritchard in the front office, because from the Tyrese Haliburton trade till now, they have made some incredible moves to really push their franchise into that upper tier. And so now it's like, how many times can you throw a strike with the same pitch or with different pitches, different moves? You know what I mean? Like, how many times can you throw a strike when you're throwing it straight down the plate? And so at some point you're gonna miss. You know what I'm saying? Or you're gonna get strikeout. So I just don't know if they want to be that aggressive. But I think this postseason will tell us a lot about how the team could look going forward into next season. But I think for now they're like, we're just gonna stand pat. And hope that it's enough. If I'm being honest, I don't think that it's enough to like win a championship. I'll be quite honest.
I think
but like I said, I do think it's enough to be in the mix. And at the end of the day, man, that's all you can ask for, because you just never know.
Only
you
a
get the
handful
playoffs
can be in the mix.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, like it's very rare you get in those situations where I've been watching basketball for a long time, where you have like the just dominant teams like, Kobe and Shaq, KD with the Warriors, LeBron with the Heat, where it was like, all right, we know at the end they're going to be there. I mean, even Boston has had their struggles this year. Even Cleveland has gotten better this year. So like there's going to be I believe some, a little turbulence there at the top of the Eastern Conference that could be good for the Pacers, who again have a chance.
I think it's going to be interesting because right now you got the Cavaliers at 1, Boston 2, New York 3, Indiana 4, Milwaukee 5, Detroit 6. I mean, Orlando's been kind of falling off a little bit. I think they might figure things out the last 29 games, but still, if you're Indiana, you can be a 4 seed playing Milwaukee and a 5 seed. Like, I think fans would feel confident they could win that game or series. And then against the Cavs, who have been kind of an unproven team in the playoffs so far, I think you'd rather play that team than either New York or Boston. So if they were to make the conference finals again, I wouldn't be shocked. And like you said, I don't know if they're going to win a championship or not, but you did kind of hint at something there a little bit. So I want to go back to it. Like, a lot of what happens in the playoffs will kind of determine what they do with this roster. So let's just say, for example, they are first out, in the first, they're out in the first round. Let's just say that happens. They lose to Milwaukee in like a close competitive series, like a 6-game series. Giannis just kind of takes over. Does that impact at all whether or not they bring Myles Turner back or not?
Woo, that is a great question. I do think that it could, and which is crazy to say, because Myles is like, look, man, I am immortal. You can't get rid of me. And honestly, he's such a good player, such a good, ambassador for the city, that something I think that he doesn't get the credit he deserves for being the caliber of player he is. Like, is Myles a superstar, all-star caliber player? No. But is he a darn good role player that any team in the NBA would probably like to have? Yes. Like, especially in the modern NBA with the, ability to catch lobs, shoot the three, and obviously block shots, which is what he's done his entire career. So I do think that could factor into his future. But at the same time, it's hard to see so far out to say, what would you give up? Because I would, similar to how the Pacers have been, almost said Colts again, but how the Pacers have been, to me, he's so valuable and so much of your identity that you have to be dead sure that if you move on from Myles Turner, you're not taking a step back. Like, you don't want to be, looking like the Mavs, where it's like, not on that scale, obviously, but where the fan base is like, you got rid of the longest guy here, our guy, and we clearly didn't get better. So that's an interesting one. I know he's getting older. His contract's a little bit weird because he keeps signing extensions, but it's never like long enough to be like away from you, so you don't have to think about it. It's like, all right, another 2 years. So we'll see, but I do think it'll be interesting. And you mentioned Milwaukee. That's the other thing I love about this Pacers team, and I've enjoyed just covering, is that they are giving us that like retro feel, I think, of having rivalries and hating, their opponents, because whether it's, I think it's most contentious probably with Milwaukee and the Pistons, just because of where they're standing in the polls and what they're fighting for. I think Boston's like a little bit different tier because they won a championship or whatever. But it seems like every night they're just chirping or arguing with somebody, and I love it. I enjoy it. I mean, I would talk crazy too if James Johnson was behind me to back me up. And I think they're backing it up with their play, which is really impressive. So we'll see how it goes, but I definitely think there could be some changes on the way, and rightfully so if they aren't able to get out of the first round, which again is so delicate, man. Like the NBA and sports in general, it's like if you flame out 1 year or have some, or even if it's like an injury or whatever the case may be, knock on wood here, I don't want anybody to get hurt. But point being, like, that changes so much. I mean, I never thought Chris Middleton would leave Milwaukee after they won a championship. And I'm like, this dude got sent to, basketball Alcatraz, basically. So, I mean, it's tough. It's tough. So we will see, but I don't want to get too far ahead of myself because I do want to enjoy this era of Pacers basketball just because I know, we'll look back 10 years from now and say, hey, remember when this squad was, one of the ones that kind of brought that feeling back.
And Middleton banished to irrelevancy, never to be seen in the playoffs again for at least probably the next 2 years unless he gets traded again.
Lord.
But, Chad Buchanan recently came on our show, and he was talking about how we had mentioned about Jarris Walker and how, the playing time has been a little bit inconsistent ever since Aaron Nesmith came back. So Chad talked about how the Pacers have basically about 11 players that deserve a right to play, but obviously that's hard to happen. It gets even harder come playoff time. No matter what happens, do you think this is finally the time that Indiana in the offseason has to look at this roster and say, we have to simplify things a little bit? Although we love having 6-7 guys that could score double-digit points, it's hard to get those guys enough playing time because you do have young talent that is looking for paydays. You do have certain extensions like an Andrew Nembhard extension kicking in, a Myles Turner, contract that you want to be able to come to an agreement with. Mathurin's due money. You got Jarris Walker who's going to be entering year 3. It feels like they can only kick this can so far. Do you think this offseason is finally the one where they say, hey, you know what? We have to make a trade?
That's a great question.
You also have a 2025 first-round pick that you have no room for. So it just feels like that adds to it. It's like you can't bring
you make a very good point. I mean, I do think that the writing's kind of on the wall, and to use a football term, like when they say you have 2 quarterbacks, you have none. So if you have all these guys and they can't get in the rotation, it's kind of similar to what we saw in Golden State. They had so many guys, and it's like, all right, we finally made some moves. They got Jimmy in there. I'm not saying the Pacers should have traded for Jimmy. I would not have done that. But it allows you to sort of maximize your assets and also minimize like your rotation, because I feel throughout this, resurgence for the Pacers, probably most bad for Jarris, because it just hasn't been a spot for him to grow, to develop, to get minutes, to play meaningful basketball. And it's like every time he does get the opportunity, things change. Or there's a different, cadence to the lineup switches and things like that. So I do think, to your point, Facci, that it's going to happen, and it needs to happen for you to be a serious team. Mainly because this isn't, AAU. This isn't something where everyone's going to get in. It's just not going to happen. And if you have a player who you believe, even if you drafted a guy like Jarris Walker, and you're like, man, I don't want to get rid of this guy. I don't want to move on from him, but we don't have any minutes for him right now, then, allow him to be useful for someone else. Use that as leverage to, make some things work on your end and to focus on your vision with your core. And I'm not saying, I just threw Jarris out there in general, but it works for every single player that they're considering, bringing back or being here long term, outside of obviously Tyrese Haliburton and others. So I do think that we could see more movement in the offseason and at the trade deadline. At the trade deadline, I was actually chilling. I was texting Tony and joking with him. I'm like, man, kick your feet up, brother. Like, this is, there's no way. I don't want to tangent. I would have bet big money that there would be pitchforks out at Gamers Field as if they got rid of Myles Turner at the trade deadline. Like, I am so serious, because to me, the whole point of running it back into this season was to see, okay, what happens when we have all our horses? And that's what everyone wants to see, man. Like, and it's the same way with the Knicks, and their injuries, Giannis and them with their injuries in Milwaukee. Everyone wants to see what happens if we can all get there and have all of our guys. And I think Benedict, is a big factor in that as well. Myles as well. So we'll see. But I definitely think there could be some movement this offseason, just because you have to make a hard decision and a painful one, and you cannot do it just based off of like, I like this guy a lot. We get it. It's a business, man. And sometimes it can be a cold business, but you got to do it.
Yeah, I never once felt like Miles was going to get traded. I thought for a second maybe they could trade Obi
To the
Toppin.
Lakers. You
To
didn't
the
hear?
Lakers.
Yeah,
LA,
right.
man.
Yeah. Oh
I wonder,
man.
they
year.
definitely need a center now, especially with the Marvin Williams trade falling through. So that's one I'm watching in the offseason. But I did tell you off air that I wanted to talk about one more thing that's not pace related, but it is Indiana related. It's the Indiana Fever. I know a team that you've covered a little bit. I don't know if you covered them for the full season or not, but you were covering them for the Athletic at
Yep.
times. And so this offseason, I mean, they have just done a great job of adding talent and including their head coach, Stephanie White. So I wanted to get your thoughts on the Fever's offseason and what you're expecting for this upcoming year.
Yeah, it's gonna be really cool. I actually went to the Indiana Basketball Hall of Fame. I go pretty much every year when they have like the big high school games out in Newcastle. And Stephanie White is in the video that they show at the Indiana Basketball Hall of Fame. So lets you know like how much of a legend she is here. And I think that one, her coaching acumen, like the success she's had, the team that she's worked with, the players she's worked with, it's a clear upgrade, I think, on paper at least, from Chrissy's side. And no disrespect to Chrissy's side, I thought she was awesome. I thought she took a lot of flack for helping the team improve, year to year. I mean, it's hard to do, man. Like you inherit Aaliyah Boston, Caitlin Clark, and it's a little, different field than what you had before. So I think Stephanie can understand sort of the scrutiny that Caitlin's under because she is an Indiana high school basketball legend. She is an Indiana, college legend. She played for the Fever, all these things. Previously coached for the Fever, all these things. I think that she can definitely kind of relate to what it means to have success here and to sort of be like, the legend here that we're seeing, Caitlin kind of write her own legend path as we speak. So I think she can relate to her from that perspective. I'm excited about that. And then from a play standpoint, I think that they're going to be fast paced and they're going to be able to sort of take more pressure off of Caitlin to do so much for the offense. I think bringing in DeWanna Bonner was huge. DeWanna Bonner is a future Hall of Famer. Like she could retire today and go to the Hall of Fame tomorrow. Like she's that good, but she gives them versatility on offense. She can create her own shot. She can shoot the three. And then defensively, she's very versatile as well. And then you keep going down the line. You're looking at other players that they added. You added Sophie Cunningham, and she's someone who can knock down the three, play defense, and that's where they have to get better. I know Stephanie White did an interview with us actually recently for The Athletic, and she was talking about how they have to just get to the middle of the pack defensively. And you can see it in their moves. Like they definitely try to get more championship caliber players, but also improve defensively because their offense was fine. They were number one, I believe, in pace, could score with the best of them when they're on. But as we all know, any form of basketball, it can be kids, women, men, whatever league in the world. Defense usually matters, at the end. So I'm excited about them, man. I think that they've invested a lot into this team. And the best part about it is that they're, not afraid to say they're going for a championship. Mm-hmm. And the wildest part about that, though, is like similar. It's like when Tyrese came to the Pacers, we knew, okay, they're serious about trying to become a contender. But even then, Tyrese wasn't in year two. Like, that's the crazy part about it. Like, you have people, DeWanna Bonner could have went to any team in the league. Like, she's that good of a player. She's that coveted as a player. She chose to come to Indiana for number 22 because of her first year in the WNBA. Like, that is unprecedented. And so I'm excited about it, man. It's going to be a movie again, this summer. It always is. But I would caution some Fever fans to say, like, I get it. You think it's going to be a title run, but it's hard, man. Like, just remember, all the greats kind of go through some heartbreak before this. And we haven't seen that on this level for Caitlin yet. So for all these people saying, oh, they're the best team in the league, they're going to win. I don't know, man. Like the Liberty are still lurking, the Aces, obviously the Lynx. And so I would say that the Fever are in like that second tier and they kind of have to prove themselves. So I'm excited, man. It's going to be a show. And then Caitlin herself, she's gotten stronger as a player, like physically stronger. I think mentally she's going to be fine. She always is. And then, like I said, it'll be packed like a playoff game every game. Like that's the craziest part about it too. Is like it is packed every single game. Yeah, I cannot afford tickets if I was ever like not in the media. Seriously.
Yes, I know. I got friends that are like massive fans and they've been going for years. They're like, it's just insane how much they've jumped since they went from
Brother,
bad
I
to-
could hear the play calls like 3 years ago when I was out there because we sat on the floor. And then now it's like I can't hear anything because Caitlin's shooting from half court, it feels like. So I'm excited, man. And Kelsey Mitchell coming back, obviously. Like, they have some really good pieces. Aaliyah taking another step forward. Don't want to forget about her. There's going to be some
Natasha Howard's
fireworks.
a big pickup too.
Exactly. 3-time champion, defensive versatility. She's a bit, coming off an injury, but I think she'll be a good presence. And Brianna Turner, I'm sorry, they added the other day. She's a all defensive player, on the team. And so they've added some pieces. And I think their vision for this team is their young core, Aaliyah, Caitlin, and obviously Kelsey. And then what can we add around our big three to kind of elevate that big three? And so I expect some high flying fast paced basketball. Although, throw one up to Aaliyah, man. I want to see something crazy too. But I expect to see some high, fast paced basketball, high level basketball here in Indiana, both from the Pacers, when it comes to the spring, and then, roll it on into the summer with the Fever. So it'll be fun, man. Like it'll be, I want to say the Fever season starts in May or something like that. And then playoffs
May or
is
April. I can't remember.
I believe it's May. Even if it is April, point being, there's going to be like that transition from NBA to WNBA. And what better city to be in than to go from watching Tyrese Haliburton, run the show with the Pacers and then see Caitlin run it with the Fever. So
yeah,
we're blessed basketball heads here in Indianapolis for sure.
Yeah. I won't lie. I uploaded a minute 30-second video to our YouTube page from when I was at the game. It was just the announcer introducing the Fever players. Most watched video on our page. It was like 50-some thousand. Crazy number.
Caitlin is why my mute button exists. Because seriously, like as soon as you tweet anything, it doesn't have to be like, I don't mean it's like in a bad way. I mean in general. It can be Caitlin like walking across the court. There's gonna be like 100 retweets and people just saying, oh my gosh, look at her. And so yeah. I think that she handles that space. And honestly, her and Ty remind me of each other in a sense. With how they handle scrutiny. And I think hers is even higher than his because of just the, her being one of the most famous athletes on earth right now.
Yeah.
But both of them are like such cool and normal people that sometimes I think that gets taken for granted because of all the noise around them. And so that's one thing that I've been big on with Caitlin is like making sure that we don't lose her voice and her story. Because if you talk to her, man, she's the most normal person ever.
Yep.
And then she gets on the court and she's like Kobe. And I'm like, all right, like I see some fire there. So she understands, what's at stake here. And she wants to win. She wants to win a championship, and she's not afraid to say it. So I know she took some slack for not getting a national championship in college. But, if you're able to get that first championship since Tamika, you'd be pretty special here.
Absolutely. So, James, I know we kept you a little bit longer than we said, so I want to thank you for your time. Obviously, I know you got a lot going on. So if you'd like to plug anything right now, that'd be a great time to do it.
Check out my Colts offseason plan, 10-step offseason plan. I enjoy putting that one together. I put on my hat and pretend to be Chris Ballard. It's 100% right, and if it's wrong, I was hacked. So that's just how I view things. And other than that, man, look out for obviously some fun NFL combine stuff coming up here soon. And then as we transition into the offseason, I'm hoping to get back to some Pacer stuff as well. So assuming they make the playoffs and they don't, have some crazy collapse, I'll see more of you, Alex, coming here down the stretch to do some fun stories and to kind of give everybody a little bit flavor when it comes to the Pacers, man. I didn't have as much clout as I do now at The Athletic. Not saying that I have a lot, but I have a little bit more cachet to be like, hey, can I go like cover this a little bit on the side because I've handled my business over here. So as long as I do all my Colts stuff, they seem pretty willing to let me, have that creative freedom to do more Fever, do more Pacers. And so I hope to give the readers and all the people here who have supported me from the start that opportunity, because I still get, messages like, hey, why aren't you at the Pacers day? And it's like, I wish I could be two places at once, but come playoff time, once you can do the draft, man, which reminds me, last year we were watching we watched what's the game where Middleton hit the three off the backboard or whatever? We watched that one in the Colts facility. We were hoping that the Colts would make a pick so we wouldn't have to work like right away. So it was coming down to like very quickly. Like we were watching like the pick ticker go by or watching overtime of the game. So once we get through that, the draft, I'll be excited to dive headfirst into some Pacer stuff for sure.
And you got the podcast. Don't forget about that.
Yeah, man, the James Boyd podcast. You know, Alex plugging my own thing before I plug it.
don't
But yeah,
forget about
check
it.
that out, man. It's been a labor of love. It is mine. I own it. And I don't say it in an arrogant way. I just mean it's whatever I want it to be. So the cool thing about it is I'll be able to do more of my own stuff. So who knows, man? I got to reach out to you guys if you come on the pod come playoff time, because they're with it. I reached out to, our host, and I was like, hey, do you mind if I do some Pacers or Fever? And they were like, nah. So I might need your help and assistance as I get back into the full groove. So I'm excited, man. Like, this is like almost my favorite time of the year, just because I know as soon as I get through the draft, baby, I can lock back in on my first love, which is basketball.
Hey, love it. Appreciate you coming on. It's always great. It's been too long, and I know this ain't the last time we'll see you this season, so looking forward to the next time.
Anytime, man. You all have a great rest of your night, and obviously keep up the great work. I mean, Setting the Pace is best Pacers podcast around, man.
Oh, we appreciate that. So, hey, until next time, James, we appreciate you.